Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Rousseau's Social Contract. Reading Rousseau's Social Contract. Today we're finally getting into book 3 about well, I want to go back to the front page because it's a pain in the ass, I understand, for everyone. Book 3 deals with discussing political laws, that is the forms of government, right? That's, you can see it there, right? Forms of government. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 1 by itself. The introduction in chapter 1. Why? I'm going to do it short, and I think this week I'm going to. We'll see what happens. I think I will today. This will start out. No. This will. I think again Mondays and Wednesdays usually are the things that we're doing the Rousseau things. So you should be getting these things where the last video finished book 2 up. Now we're going to be doing book 3, and there's going to be approximately here one. Let me see. I broke up for purposes of our doing more manageable. Um, uh, we broke it up into book 3 into including this will be 6 videos. So okay, because this is the longest chapter. This has 18 chapters in it. Okay, this is the longest section of book 3 has the most amount of chapters. So chapter 1 is rather large, so I thought it just digest it. Book 3. Before discussing the various forms of government, let us try to define the precise meaning of the word, which has not yet been really explained. So it's government. What is government? He wants to say we're going to define the government. Again, this goes us all the way back to Mr. John Locke's second treatise on government. We have this idea, and he's going to assert that it's not really defined well what is meant by government. And the government is in this sense what is the frame here? What is government? So we're going to get right away. Chapter 1 on government in general. I warn the reader that this chapter should be read carefully, and that I do not know the art of being clear for those who are not willing to be attentive. Now, this is a very striking chapter. This is a very important. It's a warning. He's warning you. Pay attention. You have to pay attention. You have to be careful. You have to pay exact attention to what I'm trying to get here, because if you're not paying attention, in other words, since the Geneva manuscript breaks off in the middle of the third paragraph of this chapter, for all practical purpose, there is no preliminary version of the remainder of the text except one paragraph in book 3, chapter 4 of that, and the chapter on civil religion in book 4, chapter 8. The importance Rousseau attached to book 3 in chapter 1 is underlined not only by the warning that the reader must be attentive, but also by the fact that that its main point, the distinction between the government and the sovereign, is emphasized so strongly in his political economy essay that was in the famous political economy essay. And that's the big difference. The government and the sovereign are not the same. They're different in a sense. That we have to understand that the sovereign is the collective general will. The government is the thing that the sovereign creates to govern for it. It's an agent. It is that aspect of agency. It can be an agent of the government. And therefore, it's not synonymous, it's not identical with the sovereign. So let's get this point out there, right? So let's say this is important to understand this. Every free action has 2 causes that combine to produce it. One is moral, namely the will that determines the act. The other is physical, namely the power that executes it. So therefore, will, which deals with what? Determines the act. Will is determinative in that sense. It decides. It is a decision that I want. It makes a decision and it determines what we want. And the physical thing is the power that executes the will. Now, power here means, remember, power is getting what you want, the ability to get what you want. Okay, getting what you want, getting what you desire, getting what you have willed. It's the getting. It's the bringing it into bringing it into fruition, right? So, so we have these two causes: the will, the moral, and then the physical, right? When I walk towards an object, I must first want to go there, and in second place, my feet must take me there. A paralyzed man who wants to run, or an agile man who does not want to do so, both will remain where they are. Right? This is that. This, the words that the person who wants to do it but has no power, right, to do so, no ability to do what I want, and the man who doesn't want, has the ability but does not want to do it, will remain in the position that they are. Right? The body politic has the same motivating causes, force and will, and are distinguishable within and so force and will. So therefore, moral and physical. Right. This is the physical, and this is the moral. Notice he produces the physical first here. The force and will are distinguishable within it in the same sense. The latter under the name legislative power, and the former under the executive power. So therefore, that's interesting. The latter, that is will, is the legislative power, the creation of a will, the legislature. This is why the idea of the legislature, general, can only create. Remember, we talked about that earlier. The purpose of the legislative, right? Therefore, we have to go back to Book 2 and discussion of the legislative. And what does the legislative mean in that sense? And in that sense, the general aspect, the legislative power's distinction between the sovereign and the legislator, right? That's different again in that sense. And then latter, the discussion of power or force. Again, this is the executive power. Nothing is or should be done there without their cooperation. So therefore, in other words, you need these two must cooperate in order to have, must do. Without the will deciding what is to be done, the power is not able to do anything. And without the power, there is will. Just because you will something but don't have the power to do it, then it's impotent. Okay, so therefore, the double-sided aspect. They must cooperate, cooperate, and coordinate. We have seen that the legislative power belongs to the people, and can belong only to it. So therefore, the legislative power idea. The legislative power must be a product of the people, everyone, the whole community. This is the idea of general will, this aspect. It is easy to see, on the contrary, by the principle already established, that the executive power cannot belong to the general public in its legislature or sovereign capacity, because this power consists solely of particular acts which are not within the jurisdiction of law, nor consequently of the sovereign, all of whose acts can only be laws. In other words, only the sovereign does this, can make general laws, general things. Remember, law is something, a general principle, a general will, a general aspect of things. The public force must therefore have its own agent, which unites it and puts it into operation according to the directions of the general will, which serves as a means of communication between state and sovereign, and which does in a sense for the public person what the union of the soul and the body does in a man. So therefore, he's saying that the connection between the state and the sovereign, right? The communication between the state and the sovereign, the idea of the general will and asset, is the same thing about the metaphor between the soul and the man. So the sovereign is of the soul, the willing agent, the will. The soul is the will entity, the willing entity. And the body is the physical thing, right? That's the body of a man. So therefore, in a public person, what a union of soul and body does in a man, soul and the body does in a man, that of the state and the sovereign. In other words, which serves as the means between the state and the sovereign, right? So what does this say? So government is that. The government is the body in that sense, the body, the physical body. The public force must have its own agent, the government. The government is that agent. The state is the whole. Remember, the state is, and it must be communication between the government and the state are one in that sense, right? The state it serves as a communication between the state and the sovereign, which is government serves as a communication between the state and the sovereign. Okay. This is why reason. This is the reason why in the state there is government. See, government is that mechanism of communication between the state, the institutions, and that, and the legislature, the soul, the sovereign in that sense, right? This is reason why there is government, which has been incorrectly confounded with the sovereign, of which it is only the minister. So therefore, in other words, the idea is the state is whereas why in the state there is the government. The idea that the government is the sovereign. No, the government is not the sovereign. This is actually maybe the big difference. Aristotle would argue that what we call government here, what Rousseau was talking about government here, that is politeia in the Greek, the regime. It is that aspect of in the regime. It is the regime, but the regime is also the soul. Whereas here, the regime is that mechanism of interaction between the sovereign and the soul. There is no concept of, there's no in Aristotle, there is no concept of sovereignty in the sense, this will be a big thing. Is there sovereignty in Aristotle's political thought? Some people say, well, it's ruling, it's kairos. But no, that's ruling is political rule would be, it has different forms. Kairos has political forms. And the closest thing that ruling manifests itself is in politeia, right? Of the liberal, here, what Rousseau is doing is working in a completely un-Aristotelian framework, accepting Hobbes's assumption of this willing idea of the sovereign will, this idea that the people in their willing construction creates a will that creates the sovereignty. That is this aspect of will, right? The general will in that sense, right? And therefore, government is the mediating body between the words that government and it is the mediating body between the sovereign and the state, right? The state is the physical embodiment of this. And the government is that agency that intermediates between the two things. That's how I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this. And this is why the state there is government, which has been incorrectly confounded with the sovereign. What is the government then? An intermediate body established between the subjects and the sovereign for their mutual communication and charged with the execution of the laws and the maintenance of civil and as well as political freedom. So wait a minute. So there it is an intermediate body. Interesting. Rousseau insists that the government is an intermediating body between what? Established between the subjects and the sovereign for their mutual interaction communication. But it's also the purpose of this is what? The government is doing what? It's also operating the instruments of state, right? That's the instruments of the state in that sense. It is the functions of the state, the tools. And what is the execution? They charge with the execution of laws and so two things it does. And charge with the execution of the laws and maintenance of civil as well as political freedom. So it's in charge of executing laws and maintenance of civil and political freedom. Public safety, survival of the things, the rights of citizens. The members of this body are called magistrates or kings, that is, governors. Right? Notice that the government is governors, magistrates or kings, and the body as a whole bears the name prince. There's a footnote here. In Thus, in Venice, the college is given the name most sincere, serene prince, even when the Doge is not in attendance. Right. This is that line. So therefore, it is government. The government is the prince. This is the executor is the. Okay, let's go. We lost the sign here. The governor says that therefore this idea of magistrates or kings or the governors in that body bears the. Thus, those who claim that the act by which the people subject itself to leaders is not a contract are entirely right. So therefore, this is not. In other words, it is not. The contract is the creating of the social body, the creation of the thing that they construct the situation to leaders. This is not the it's and is not a contract. Our entire right. The contract is not the establishment of government. The contract is the creation of the general will, and the general will create or the elements within the society that emanate through the general will create the government. Right. It is absolutely nothing but a commission, a function in which a simple officer of the sovereign they exercise in its name the power that has been entrusted to them by the sovereign, and that the sovereignty can limit, modify, and take back whatever it pleases, since the alteration of such a right is incompatible with the nature of the social body and contrary to the association. So this is Rousseau's retooling. And see, for Hobbes, the sovereign is both the contract, the king, the ruler, and the. So doesn't Hobbes doesn't really clarify in Leviathan. Hobbes doesn't really clarify the distinction between sovereign and magistrate. No, he does. Oh, magistrate he does, but not king. Okay, not ruler, not the king, not the ruler, not the supreme ruler. Be it one, few, or many. Right. That's and hence government thus becomes kind of synonymous with the rulers who are sovereign. Okay, the rulers are sovereign because the people have created their rulers, and that's what the difference here is. Leaders. For Hobbes, the contract deals with the leaders. Rousseau says, no. The contract, in other words, it's for Hobbes, the social contract goes from the general to the particular in a way that Rousseau is not comfortable with. Rousseau does not think that it can go from the particular. It can only stay at the general. And that only the general will and the parts of the general will in its exercise can then delegate or establish the ruler. But it's not the social contract in that sense. It is not the originating contract. So again, exercise the name of the power that has been trusted to them by the sovereign, and that the sovereign can limit, modify, and take back whatever it pleases, since the alienation of such a right is incompatible with the nature of the social body and contrary to the goal of the association. In other words, and Rousseau doing this, he resolves the problem of challenging a ruler. Because when the ruler, there's that. This is the Rousseau Hobbes doesn't really deal with how to deal with what happens when the ruler is wrong. Uh, it's almost saying he can't be wrong. right? And in the same way, Rousseau is saying that's because he associates the ruler with the sovereign, right? That's what he's doing here. He's doing the ruler with the sovereign. Where Rousseau seems to argue the sovereign is the collective will of the body politic, right? It creates the body politic, it creates the body. It also establishes the will, the general will, and the functions of this to do this. But however, government is that intermediate body between the individual peoples and the sovereign. The collective versus the individual, right? The individual members and the collective of the general will in that sense, right? This is that very important aspect of this. And therefore, because it can what? It can entrust it to them by the sovereign, right? And therefore, the sovereign can limit. Therefore, government is entrusted to by the sovereign, and therefore the government, the sovereign can limit, modify, and take back what it pleases, right? So that's the difference. In fact, that's the whole point here with the king, right? The king is the sovereign, so that he has absolute power in that sense. Where what Rousseau does here said, no, 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 no. This Hobbes is sloppy here. Hobbes needs to fix this. You have to add. If you don't add this division, you have that. This is why Leviathan has these conundrums in here. And this is why some people may say, "Oh, therefore this is not." This problem shows that Hobbes doesn't really believe this. He's just using this scientific understanding. He really agrees with Aristotle. As I joke, there's people who believe in Locke-Aristotle. Locke is Aristotle. Well, if Aristotle lived at the time of Locke, he would agree with Locke. Certain people I know to say this nonsense. Um, um, well, there's also Hobbes-Aristotle, where this is absurd that say Hobbes and Aristotle are basically, because Hobbes almost seems openly rejecting, always publicly, openly rejecting. Now, even though he uses Aristotle and does embrace some aspects of Aristotle, he rejects the fundamental claims of Aristotle about the human nature, human beings, human mind, human reason, and expropriates it and rewrites it into a understanding of man, nature, and reason that is completely antithetical to Aristotle's. So here Rousseau is saying, no, we have to fix it. And he does so with this, what he's saying here. This is what he's doing here. He's separating, he's treating the king as an agent of the sovereign and not merely. And by the way, that is present in Hobbes, but it's unclear. It's not explicitly said. Because I think if he explicitly said it, I think there's a reason why he doesn't say it. There's a reason why Hobbes remains unclear, and and it's an esoteric reason. That is, he didn't want to alienate Charles and Charles II's supporters. Remember, he was in exile with Charles in France and trying to educate and trying to get good with the Charles Restoration circles. And he didn't want, even though that some of the Cromwellites and some of those people looked at him favorably, he didn't want to be tied with the Cromwellites and what was going on there. So he wanted to be seen with the Restoration, and he feared being labeled a traitor and anti-king if he was more clear that the king is not the sovereign, but the king is a agent of the sovereign more clearly and more explicitly. But by not doing that, he's doing this to protect himself within the court of Charles. Rousseau sees that's a problem. This exoteric unclarity. To avoid getting, now Hobbes is usually very clear, and you can say, why is he unclear here in the body? Why does he kind of derail himself the way he does? This is a big question in Hobbes. Rousseau wants to fix that. He doesn't. In other words, he stays with he perfects, makes more perfect or more consistent Hobbes' teaching here, and Leviathan, and also Locke's teaching here. I therefore give the name of government or supreme administration to the legitimate exercise of executive power, and prince or magistrate to the man or the body charged with that administration. So the government is that supreme administration and to the legitimate exercise of executive power. And by the way, that is what government is meant in parliamentary models. This is the this is what when people speak of the British, they speak of a government, a cabinet government, or a government created by the parliament. The majority in parliament creates ministers, and they form the government is the ministers. That is. Now, this is the difference. In America, we don't have a government in this sense. We have an administration. The president and his executive are elected. The president is directly elected, and the people elect the president, and therefore the president um, appoints his magistrates, secretaries, and things like that, and ministers, and using the European word magistrates or ministers. And what happens is Congress has to approve it, right? The Senate will have to approve it under the Constitution. So there is, whereas the legislative branch is separated from executive branch, where in the parliamentary model, the legislative branch, whoever controls the legislature, the majority in the legislature, or a coalition that forms a majority in the legislature, establishes a government, appoints the ministers. Okay, that's the parliamentary versus the presidential model in that sense. So this is why he talks about here is the prince or magistrate to the man or to the body charged with that administration. Again, it is in the government that are found the intermediate forces whose relationship compose the relationship of the whole to the whole, or to the sovereign to the state. So it is in the government that are the various intermediate forces. That is the institutions, the structures, right, the bodies that compose the relationship of the whole to the whole, or to the sovereign to the state. The latter relationship can be represented by the extremes of continuous proportion, of which the proportional mean is the government. So the government is that, in other words, the later relationship, that of the sovereign to the state, can be represented by extremes of continuous proportion. So different, in other words, it's different ratio size. So the government can, in other words, the size of the government can be proportion to the state, the sovereign. Okay, the state, in other words, the state and the sovereign are in a proportional relationship. Means average, right? I mean average. A proportional mean. That is government. Government is the proportional mean between the relationship between, in other words, those institutions in a sense. That the latter relationship can be represented by extremes of proportions. So it can be either very little or very large, right? The government can be in that sense. The government receives from the sovereign the orders that it gives to the people. And in order for the state to be in good equilibrium, all things considered, the product or power of the government taken by itself must be equal to the power of, or to the power or, sorry, equal to the product or power of the citizens, who are the sovereigns on the one hand and subject on the other hand, right? The whole on the whole. Everyone is both a citizen and a subject, right? In that sense. The citizens are both a sovereign and subjects. So therefore, as individual, collectively they're the sovereign, but individually they are subjects. Right? That's a weird aspect of this. So therefore, there is this equilibrium here that has to be taken when he says that. In other words, that gives the people and the orders of the state In other words, the sovereign gives the order to the governments, and then the government tells the people what to do. And a good equilibrium is that the power, the power of the product or power of the government, the product of the government or the power of the government, taken by itself, must be equal to the product or power of the citizens. So this is that weird thing. This is that note 71. This is the equation in note 71. Hold on, let me just do this. Okay, I'm back. Here's note 471. You can't read it. A continuous proportion is a geometric procession such that A to B equals B to C equals C to D, and dot, 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 onwards, right? Hence, Rousseau's formulation could be restated algebraically as follows. Sovereign is to government equals government to subjects, or sovereign times subjects equals government squared, right? On the mathematical formulation implication, see Masters' book, Robert Masters' book, Philosophy of Rousseau, on these pages, and Michel Francon's Language of Mathematics in Rousseau, in this Chastillon-Telico, 1957. So you see this idea. This is the equation. This is the language of the equation that's here. So we're back. So this is how we do it, right? That equation. So therefore, we have this idea of proportionality of this thing. Moreover, none of these three terms could be altered without the simultaneously destroying the proportions. Remember that equation, right? That sovereign people, sovereign times people equals government squared, or government is the square root of. That's the additional aspect of it. Government is the square root of. Yeah, government is if sovereign subjects, right? Sovereign times subjects equals government squared. So government by itself is equal to the square root of sovereignty and times subjects, right? So that's that weird relation there. Um, Again, that's the other algebra to get to it. Okay. Moreover, none of these three terms can be altered without simultaneously destroying the proportion. Right. If the government wants to govern, or if the magistrate wants to make laws, or if the subject refuses to obey, disorder replaces rule. Force and will no longer act in concert, and the state dissolved, whereby falls into despotism and anarchy. Okay, in other words, either it's pure force or there's no force and therefore everything anarchy, right? There's force without will, and therefore will is that it's not legitimate. It's the properly it's private wills rather than the general will. Individual wills that are not really the general will. That is despotism. When private will imposes itself on everyone, that is despotism, right? It's a private will that is an error. Does not reflect or does not embody the general will, and therefore it's a private personal will that is imposed either of an individual or a group. It imposes itself on the general will in that sense. So that's despotism. Anarchy is when there is no that basically there is no power. There's wills, all willing things, but there's no unification, no unity. Everything is acting on its own, right? So anarchy. And remember, the thing about this, anarchy does lead to despotism, right? That's Kolakowski's line. tyranny is the handmaiden of anarchy. This is the point that Hobbes even says in the state of nature. The state of nature's anarchy leads everyone to want to escape it, and they would embrace despotism in order to escape it. Okay. Um, Finally, since there is only one proportional means for each relationship, there is no more than one good government possible in a state. So therefore, that once there's the means of these things, the mean of those situations, right? Since there is only one proportional mean for each relationship, there is no more than one good government in a possible state. But as 1,000 events can change the relationship of a people, not only can different governments be suited to various peoples, but also the same people at different times. So therefore, government is not going to remain the same. Government, in other words, the changes in the people will lead to changes in government. Changes in one will lead to changes in the other. Proportional changes. So, but as he says, 1,000 events can change the relationship of a people. Not only can the different governments be suited to various people, but also to the same people over different times. Right? So therefore, not only this, different peoples will get different governments because of what they are, the quality of the people and what they are, what they're capable of and what they are. This is a very not everyone is not equal here. All governments are not the same. Governments will vary based on the quality of the people. It's the people, which is the relationship of the sovereign and it's that connection between the people are what? The people are both sovereign and subjects. So what this is that you can even say people equals sovereign and subject. Okay, that's a weird, interesting thing. What is this? This is both. They're the same, right? It's the square root of it, right? The square root of it. That's weird. And government is equal to people. No, it isn't. Okay, this is a weird thing. What does that mean here? How's the anarchy? What is that structure here? Finally, since there is only one proportional means for each relationship, as he said, right? Therefore, as he said, right? As I said here, there can be uh, um, uh, uh, there's only one good government for that thing, right? So if a good government is not going to be, there's not going to be one good government for all. There's no one fit all, one good government that is all good all for everyone. That what is good will always reflect the particularities of a given people in their time and place, in their condition. So the people and their condition, go back to the structure that he said, a people and their condition. The nature, the character of the people, and which is shaped by the people and what they are, and by their environment that they're in and the situation that they're in. Right? This interaction between that two. Hence, what he says that the 1,000 events can change this, right? But that this is why that not only can different governments be suited for different peoples, but also that the same people at different times. To try to give some ideas to the various relationships that can exist between these two extremes, right? I shall take as an example the number of people, which is a comparatively easy to express. So the number of people, right? So let's address the question of the number of people. Let us suppose that the state is composed of 10,000 citizens. The sovereign can only be considered collectively as a body. Each private individual in his status and as a subject is considered as an individual. Thus, the sovereign is to the subject as 10,000 to 1. So the whole is 10,000. So citizen is 1, each individual is 1 to 10,000. The subject is as 10,000 to 1. 10,000 to 1. Right? Okay. Which is to say that the share of each member of the state is only 1/10,000th of the sovereign authority, even though he is totally subjected to it. If the people is composed of 100,000, the condition does not change, and each is equally under the domination of the laws, while his vote, reduced to 1/100,000, has 10 times less influence on their drafting. So the bigger the size, in other words, this is very interesting, that in the smaller size, the individual has more proportional power. In other words, the larger the thing gets, each individual has less import or less ratio, impact, right? Since the subject always remains one, the ratio of the sovereign to the subject increases in proportion to the numbers of citizens, right? So the ratio of the sovereign to the thing increases to the number of citizens, from which it follows that the larger the state grows, the less freedom there is. Iron law of oligarchy. Moscow. That's Moscow. This is Tocqueville. This is why Montesquieu's argument that you can't despotic large states will be increasingly despotic in Montesquieu, and that small state only free states can either moderate states have to be moderate, but free states will tend to be small republics. So this is a very interesting. Thus, since the subject always remains one, the ratio of the sovereign to the subject increases in proportion to the amount of citizens. This is why now this is 72. This is that real note in 72, which again, um, I'll read the note, Masters. Rousseau says that the subject will always remain one because the laws, if legitimate, must apply equally with full force on each citizen as subject. Compare Book 2, Chapter 4. Sorry, Chapter 6, Book 4, Chapter 6, right? And it follows, however, that the ratio of sovereign to the state and the ratio of government to the state must be whole numbers, i.e., the denominator is always one. This detail is crucial if one is to understand Rousseau's reference to the series of whole numbers later in the chapter. Right? So the idea of whole numbers. Every citizen is one. Every subject is one. No fractions. This is why the scandal in Dominion machines. You can have fractions of votes. You can have fractions of votes. What? You can't. No, sorry. Each individual is one. Equality requires that. That once you have once Dominion allows for fractions in the voting count, then there's no equality. Okay, and by the way, therefore, the mere fact that the Dominion system permits there to be fractions in votes for the voting system. Okay, I can understand that you can do that for the purposes. You might have to do that on the purposes of different types of share votes in a business situation. So if this was, but the system for elections should not have that function in it. Why? Because that violates, unless you don't have if the regime isn't your regime isn't it does not believe in the equality of citizens, and some people should get two votes and other people get one vote or less votes, right? Um, you understand how this works in that sense? You have violate, and by the way, that's a complete violation of American law, because the American Constitution guarantees the 14th Amendment. There's cannot be, in other words, equality under the law. Therefore, you cannot, someone cannot have more of a vote than anyone else in that sense. Now, you can get a situation that you have a right to vote. I mean, this idea that everyone has the right to vote everywhere, no. You have the right to vote to the community you're in, the district you're in. That is the case. So, and illegals don't get counted. Illegals are not citizens. All citizens are equal under the law. and only citizens can vote, particularly tied to the citizens of a certain age, 18 and older, right? And that they have bothered to register. That's another thing. Go register. You have to register that you are a voter. You have and what to prove the registration is that you wait. It basically to show that what you're registering to vote in that district in that location. It's all registration is. It's not saying that you automatically possess the right to vote, but registration just makes sure that you can vote. Your vote can be applied in that place and in that time. So therefore, once you add fractions to this, that violates this principle right here. Let's go continue it here, right? And if I say, in other words, when I say that the ratio increases, I mean that it grows further away from equality, right? That's right, exactly. In other words, as this population grows bigger and bigger, then what happens is the relative power in that sense. Thus, the greater the ratio in the geometric sense, the less relationship there is in the ordinary sense. Okay, this is again. I have to give the note here. I think this is probably Rousseau uses the word report, which can mean either mathematical ratio or of a relationship twice in the sentence. Since Rousseau plays on the ambiguity of the terms untranslatable, of the term is ambiguity of in other words, he's playing on ratio of report and report. Report has ratio and report has relationship. It's untranslatable. Ratio is used for report in the geometric sense, and relationship for report in the ordinary sense. Right? That's why he uses it that sense. That's why he has the note there. It's important to understand that it's the word here for ratio. In other words, and is report. The ratio here, the report. Or the ratio increases. It's this duality, both in the geometric and this. In the former, the report, in French, ratio, he says translation, considers in terms of quantity, is measured by the quotient. And in the latter, the relationship, again, report, considered in terms of likeness, is essential by its similarity. So therefore, what? Quantity, numbers, ratio regarding geometry is the quantity, right? And is measured by the quotient, quotient, number of people, right? What is that? Yeah. And the latter, the relationship is what, in terms of likeness, is estimated by similarity. How similar you are, what the idea of similarity in that sense. Now, the the less relationship there is between private wills and the general will, that is between the mores and the laws, the more repressive force should increase. So in other words, there has to be an agreement between the laws, the will, the general will, and the mores. In other words, here's very interesting. The general will is the collective entity of here. The laws. The laws are part of the general will. The mores are emerge out of the character of the people. There should be a situation where if mores and laws are, um, well, this is the term, it's correlation. There's this very high correlation between the mores, the habits of the beliefs and habits of the people, and the law, general will, then there's going to be not that much use force. In other words, the less the relationship there is between private wills and the general will, that is between the private will, all the private wills are the mores, right? And therefore, the collective, there is this kind of intersection where there's this high correlation between mores and laws. Again, remember, general will, laws, private wills, mores. Therefore, the less relationship there is between the private wills and general wills, that is between mores and laws, the more repressive force should increase. So if there is less if these are if the correlation between mores and laws are not there, that there is a gap between them or difference between it, then there's going to be required force. Laws will need force. Where the mores are in conformity with the laws, when the mores are in greater conformity with the laws, then there will be no need for force. But when the laws are in when the mores are in disconformity or not in agreement with the laws, does not correlate with the laws, then there needs increasing force to the degree that they're not correlating. Okay? Should increase. So more repressive force should increase. Thus, in order for the government to be good, it ought to be relatively stronger in proportion as the people is more numerous. In other words, if the government's going to be good, maintain its rule, it needs more power, he says. It's going to need more force as it becomes more numerous, more violent, more force and violence. The mores are going to be different. The more larger it is, there's going to be less likelihood of the private wills are going to be homogenous with each other, share the same things. There's going to be differentiation, and therefore there's going to be mores that are these groups are going. This group is going to have a certain mores, and there's going to be greater heterogeneity. Oh, sorry, yeah. There's going to be a greater heterogeneity in the mores. Homogeneity means everyone is in agreement. Does not everyone will kind of agree with the mores, but in fact, when there's a large population, there's going to be less likely that the individuals are going to be there's going to be difference, and as the difference increases, what will be the mores? They will have differences in mores. And the differences in mores will produce the need for more coercion, force, in order to maintain their being good. Thus, in order for the government to be good, it ought to be relatively stronger in proportion as the people the people is more numerous. As the people are more numerous, I would say right now. The people, in that sense, the people, the on the other hand, as the enlargement of the state, on the other hand, as the enlargement of the state gives those entrusted with the public authority more temptations and means to abuse their power, the more force the government should have. The more force the government should have to restrain the people, the more the sovereign should have in turn to restrain the government. So, this is a weird thing. This is a very weird thing he's saying here. Now, I want to see if I do understand it right. Where is this next? In other words, the government, in other words, since the larger the state, there's going to be more force, and the government's going to have more and more force. And because of that, and therefore this leads to temptation of government to abuse their power. It gives them the temptation and the means to abuse their power. And the more force the government should have to restrain the people, right, the more the sovereign should have in turn to restrain the government. In other words, the sovereign needs to check the government. It needs to restrain it. I am not speaking here of absolute force, but of the relative force of various parts of the state. In other words, this is very interesting. He's not speaking of the absolute force, but the relative. In other words, they have to restrain it in somehow. They have to put checks on it and restrain the relative force of the various parts of the state. So therefore, it's not the absolute force of the whole state, but of the relative force of various parts, agents, instruments, magistrates of the state. It follows from this double relationship that the continuous proportion between the sovereign, the prince, and the people is no arbitrary idea, but rather a necessary consequence of the nature of the body politic. I'll repeat that. In other words, there's double relationship that is continuous proportion between the sovereign, the prince, the magistrates, right, the government, the sovereign, the government, and the people, the subjects, is no arbitrary idea, but rather the necessary consequence of the nature of the body politic. It also follows that since one of the extremes, namely the people as subject, is fixed and represented by unity, whenever the doubled ratio increases or decreases, the simple ratio increases and decreases similarly. So, therefore, in other words, this is a weird point here. He's saying, and that consequently, the middle term is changed. Now, in Masters' note, Rousseau's 18th century mathematical term should not be obscure the basic idea. Starting from the last equation, and note 71, which is government, remember we said government. Well, let me just go back to that thing. So hold on. So back to the note here. This is where he says in 74, Rousseau's 8 mathematical terms, right, should, it goes up here, right? We're doing it here. Starting from the last equation, note 71, substituting the value subjects as equal to 1. So subjects equal 1, right? This is as note 72, because the one is that the subjects is equal to 1, right? Subjects is always 1. Substituting the value of subjects as equal to 1. Rousseau notes that government squared equals the sovereign. So if subjects are 1, 1 times sovereign is sovereign. So this is what happens. Calling the expression government squared a double ratio, Rousseau concludes that the force of government should vary according to the size of the sovereign. And then compare the next paragraph, right? That's the whole point. So this is going to get to that very ratio. So let's go back, stop here and go back. So, okay, so that the middle term has changed, right? That's the whole point. This shows that there is no unique and absolute constitution of government. So there's no unique. There's always this aspect of this. So if we have there, the middle term has changed. So therefore, it's government squared equals sovereign. Sovereign equals government squared, right? So because subject is 1 times government, sovereign is 1. Sovereign equals government squared. This again shows there's no unique and absolute constitution of the government, but that there can be as many governments of different natures as there are states of different sizes. So the question of, therefore, the types of government, the number of governments will depend on the size of the state, and the relationship of the ratio between in this equation, right? If in ridiculing this system, it was said that in order to find the proportional means and form the body of the government, it is only necessary, according to me, to calculate the square root of the number of people, I would reply that I merely use that number here as an example, that the relationship of which I speak are not measured solely by the number of men, but in general by the quantity of action, which is itself a combined result of a multitude of causes. And moreover, if I momentarily borrow the vocabulary of geometry in order to express myself in fewer words, I am nevertheless not unaware that geometric precision does not exist in moral quantities. So he's repeating Aristotle's warning That yes, I'm using a metaphor. This is a metaphor. I'm using the language of geometry to simplify my argument. And I'm not going to get, even therefore, I'm not going to, the moral question here, the question of reason, the rational, analytical argument, the moral argument, is not something determined by, or can it says what? Um, does not exist in the geometric precision does not exist. You're not never going to have that precision. So it's not going to be the square root of the people. No, the square root number of people. That's not. No, that's not what I mean here. Rather, this idea of proportionality is this. He's wanting to say the size of the people. There's a problem. If the size is too big, what he says is going to be more likely necessary force, and that creates problems. And the power of the state, the power that the more force is necessary in order to regulate the state effectively, to make it good. Therefore, what happens is that leads to risk. The government becomes, and therefore the sovereign needs to check the government. Right? Hence, this is why the equation sovereign equals government squared. You could square root the. You could just add. Um, uh, what is the square root of sovereign? Well, that's I don't know what that's. The square root is sovereign, but then that is even more of a problem, right? He talks about here, right? Next, the government is on the small scale. That government is on a small scale. What the body politics that contains it is on the large scale. So therefore, government is on a small scale. This relationship. Government is the small scale of what the body politic is at the larger scale. So therefore, there's a ratio. The government is in relation ratio to this. And it can be different ratios. Some bigger than others, right? But it's still a ratio. It's not the whole. It is a part. It is a part of the whole, not the whole. It's not a whole and a whole. The sovereign and the government are not one. They're agents. They're individual. They're agents appointed or delegated to individuals within the sovereign granted those authority, right, to do this. They're individual actors in that sense. They're not the whole. So therefore, there's proportionality here. The size of government in that sense is proportional to that. So therefore, it is a moral person endowed with certain faculties, active like the sovereign, passive like the state. In other words, that okay, the sovereign is active, the state body, the whole body, the state is the passive act. Therefore, this government is both a moral person, like the sovereign, and that therefore that they are a moral person endowed with certain faculties, active like the sovereign and passive like the state, and that it can be broken down into similar relationships from which new proportions constantly arise. And still another within the one, according to within this one, according to the order of tribunals, until an invisible middle term is reached. That is a single leader or a supreme magistrate who can be considered in the middle of this progression as the unity between the series of fractions and the whole number. Now he's engaging in the language of the metaphor of these fractions. And he says that therefore that like the government itself has all these fractions themselves. They're proportional. They're proportional in that relationship, and therefore it can be the state itself can be broken down in other words, the government can be broken down into similar small relationships that are therefore fractions within fractions, right? And still another within this one, according to the orders of the tribunals, right? This idea that different tribunals and different things, until the indivisible middle term is reached, some middle term, he says, and this indivisible middle term is a single leader or supreme magistrate who can be considered in the middle of this progression as the unity between all the series of fractions and the whole number and that of the whole numbers, which is the subjects, right? The subjects, every subject is equal to one. Every subject is one. So let's stop here, go to look at 75. I think this is an important note, so I'm going to stop here and say, at first, the phrase cannot fail to be puzzling, he says. This is Masters says this, and he's right. Rousseau seems to say the government is a moral person that can be broken down into similar relationships that constitute new proportion, that is, within the continuous proportions discussed by this point. But if the supreme magistrate is the indivisible middle term or unity, one divided by one, separating the series of fractions that of the whole numbers, then the ratio of the sovereign to government is a fraction. So the ratio of the sovereign to government is a fraction. And the ratio of the government to the state is a whole number. Okay. The latter is clear enough. See editorial note 72 in that sense, right? But since a fraction cannot equal a whole number, it follows the continuous proportion can never be perfectly realized in practice. He's saying. That's right. They can never be perfect. Although the government should be subordinate to the sovereign, the quality of action of the people as sovereign is apparently always less than the quality of action of the government. Okay, and this is go see his introduction. So therefore, this is why this is going to be the problem. The quality of, in other words, that the quality of action of the people as a sovereign is always going to be less than that of the government. In that sense, this is what leads to the problem. This is why this leads to the situation of what happens, and this is why he talks about it in page 18 and 20, which I'm not going to go, and you can go. Let me just took 1820. So this is that line in his introduction. Let me just read it. Like it's about the general will as Platonic ideal. That's the chapter 18 to 20, right? That is the general ideal will as a Platonic ideal. This is we can disagree with that. I'm not going to read it. You can go read it, check it yourself on this. And I'm just going to go back to where I was. So hold on. Without being involved in the multiplication of new terms, let us be satisfied to consider the government as a new body in the state, distinct from both the people and the sovereign, and intermediate between them. So that's another thing. The government is the intermediate area of that. The essential difference between these two bodies is that the state exists by itself, but the government exists only through the sovereign. So the state exists of itself. The state and the sovereign are connected in that sense, right? But the government can only exist through the sovereign. Thus, the dominant will of the prince is not or should not be anything except the general will or the law. So there should be agreement. This idea that the law, that the prince, the dominant will of the prince is not or should not be anything except the general will of the law. His force is only the public force concentrated in him. So all his power, all his stuff is nothing more than what the legislator, the legislative entity, acting as the general will, has authorized them to do. As soon as he wants to derive from himself some absolute and independent act, the bond tying the whole together between loosens. So therefore, once he decides to go private will, his own, instead of following what the legislature wants, and he just acts on his own will, decision. If he acts not according to what the general will is required, this is why there's the problem of this. This is why, the question then is who's, government, political systems that will directly elect a president creates a problem, because then he's the general will. He has a claim to be the representative agent, and therefore the general will has authorized him to do it. If he's been called to do so, that's why the American founding fathers did not want to make the president directly elected, because that's a very having a president, a chief executive or chief magistrate, the executive authority, the master holding executive authority, directly elected by the people, is a challenge. This is why governors. The question is that most governors don't are most states do not have unitary executives. Most states in America don't have unitary executives. And this is why most European states do not give their presidents much power. The French president was the French example is the one that does give lots of power to this, and has a very weak parliament that can check on the parliament is nothing but a ratifying agent for the president and his ability to appoint government. So this is what this element of this here, right? Let's continue. If, in other words, loosens, right? If it becomes absolute, it becomes loosens. If it finally comes about that the prince had a private will more active than that of the sovereign, and that he used some of the public force at discretion to obey that private will, so that there were, so to speak, two sovereigns, one by the right and the other by fact. At that moment, the social union would vanish and the body politic would be dissolved. That's the warning. That's the danger here. However, in order for the body for however, in order for the body of the government to exist, to have real life that distinguishes it from the body of the state, and for all its members to be able to act in concert and fulfill the purpose for which it is instituted. The government has been instituted, right? The ministers that they are. It must have a separate self, a sensibility shared by its members. In other words, a separate self, a sensibility shared by its member, and a will, a force or a will of its own that leads to its preservation. So it has to have a will of its own too. In other words, the government in these things, in other words, have a distinguish between it from the body of the state, and for all of its members to have a concert and function to fulfill, for which it was instituted, it must have a separate self, right? A shared sense by the members of it, the government, a force or will of its own that leads to it can preserve itself. This separate existence presupposes assemblies, councils, and bodies to deliberate and decide rights, titles, and privileges that belong exclusively to the prince. And that makes the magistrate status more honorable in proportion as it is more laborious, right? The idea is more honorable because it's more labor, it's more work. But they have the magistrate here is below the prince. He has more work, he has more functions. So the prince is the more general one. The prince is the more general one. The specific individual magistrate is the one that is doing specific functions and more onerous labor, right? More laborious. The difficulty lies in organizing the subordinate whole within the whole in such a way that it does not change the general constitution by strengthening its own. That is always distinguished between its separate force intended for its own preservation and the public force intended for the preservation of the state. And in short, that it is ever ready to sacrifice the government to the people and not the people to the government. Okay, that's the weird part. So therefore, you need to have survived. You need to survive. The government needs to survive in order to what? In order to deliver to the people, they have to be strong enough and have enough force to be able to do what the legislator done for the sake of the people. The government is there to serve the people, to serve the benefit of the people, the public good, the public benefit. Therefore, they need to sacrifice their good. In other words, if the thing about this is that requires them to sacrifice, they should sacrifice to the people, not the people to them. So the public force, they should have enough force to preserve the people, the state, in that sense, the state, which is the people in that sense, right? The state and the people are one in that sense. Again, the people, the collective people, the body politic, collectively active is the sovereign and passive is the state, right? So therefore, in this short, therefore they need this public force, right? They need to have power, but they need their purpose of their power is the well-being and preservation of the people. So, so it's ever to sacrifice the government to the people and not the people to the government. Besides, although the artificial body of the government is the product of another artificial body, right? So therefore, that the government is an artificial body of the social body. Remember, the body politic is an artificial body. Again, Hobbes. The state is an artificial body. The body politic is the state. It is the sovereign. The sovereign is the body, artificial body. So the sovereign and the general will is the product of is the will of that sovereign, right? So again, the state and the body, the state and the sovereign are the body politic, which is an artificial body, and then government is another artificial body. In other words, that government is a product of another artificial body, and has, in a sense, only a borrowed or subordinate life. So therefore, this one is subordinate from that, right? And this does not prevent it from acting with more or less vigor or speed, or from enjoying a more or less robust state of health, so to speak. So therefore, just because it is that, in other words, it can still act. It will act. It will have power. It will do this. Even though it comes from this, it still has enough. Does not mean it will not have enough energy and power to do it. It can have that. So there is nothing preventing it from acting more or less vigor or speed, or from enjoying a more or less robust state of health. Finally, without directly departing from the goal of this institution, right? It can deviate from that goal to a greater or lesser extent according to the way in which it was constituted. In other words, okay, you shouldn't go against that, but well, it depends. In other words, how much can the government depart from, in other words, the goal of its institution? In other words, finally, without directly departing from the goal of its institution, what is the goal of this? It can deviate from that goal to a greater or lesser extent by how that institution was that given institution, or the office, magistrate, or that was created, was constituted. How it was constituted, how much power it was given, how much leeway it was given, how much discretion, how much discretion it was given, how much discretion to decide or deliberate. Sometimes that body is given, the sovereign is given it some discretion. Well, that discretion is therefore it can lead it to deviating from something. It may appear to be deviating, but it can be done as long as it's not directly departing, without directly departing of the goals of that institution. It can deviate, and the deviation is always going to be tied to to the extent, greater or lesser extent, according to the way in which the institution, that the specific institution of government, that second level artificial, is been constituted. From all these differences arise the various relationships in the government ought to have with the body of the state, according to the accidental and particular relationships that modify the given state. So therefore, in other words, the relationship between the sovereign, the people, the subjects, and the government, right? This is going to be the something that's going to be the variation. All these differences arise between the various relationships the government ought to have with the body of the state, right? Relationships. The government is going to have a relationship with the body of the state, according to the accidental and particular relationship that modify a given state. So in other words, the accident, what was done there by accident, something's going to be done by accident. Why? What does that mean? Because this accident means the specific realities that is there, that was done in that condition. The accidental means that it's the decisions and choices made because of the condition or the reality, right? And the particular is that individual case, the individual relationship, the individual part. So the accidental is what happens because of the condition, and the particular is what the specific function or the specific relationship. That is the relationship between the general sovereign, and the people to do something, function, right? Do that function, do that tool, do that thing. Um, so therefore, that is according to the accidental and particular relation that modify a given state, right? So therefore, not only there's a relationship, but there's going to be what? There's going to be the accidental and the particular relationships of that government, of the government and the intermediating institutions for that state. For often the government that is For often the government that is in itself the best will become the worst if its relationship are not modified according to the defects of the body politic to which it belongs. So, in other words, if you don't deal with the body politics as it is, the reality of them, and their defects, then if you have a good government that doesn't change to reflect the remember the relationship between laws and mores, right? The government itself is going to need to constantly always change in relation to the people. So therefore, if the laws, in other words, the government doesn't change and modify itself, and so that it really is able to effectively govern or deliver to the people what the people expect, then there's going to be problems, right? In other words, if the people are going to have certain characteristics and traits that are defective, the government needs to also respond to them in that sense. Otherwise, it's not going to work in that sense. It'll fall apart. So therefore, the best government will become the worst if it doesn't respond to the defects of the people. Very interesting. There is no Platonic ideal. The Platonic ideal in political life would be dangerous. Why? Because unless you have ideal people, you can't have. In other words, the type of government you have will always depend on the quality of the people. Therefore, if you have a perfect government, and if you don't have perfect people, it will not be the best. It will be the worst, because it won't produce what is best for that people. And that's how we end this chapter. And this has been a long chapter. I know it's probably, oh my God, this has been long. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below, and I'll respond to them when you see them. If you like it, like the channel, like the video, please like the video. Share it with a friend. Get it on social media. Tweet. Put it out there to have something to do it. If you've not subscribed, subscribe. What is the benefit of subscribing? Because you can. Well, one, increasing the subscriptions are important for me. I need to grow the channel some more. We've been small growth. It's been kind of small instrumental growth. I hope that more people will come and look at this stuff, and students and things like this, people interested in these things. Rousseau is very interesting in this regard. For those who are studying political politics and political institutions and democracy and understand how government works, Rousseau is not this the big bad guy people think he is. Another aspect is why you should like it is that you get the notifications, the new videos. So you can help me, and also you get notifications. Oh, notifications! Another thing is, if you didn't like the video, you can say, "Okay, of course you please. You have the right to. You have the right to your own opinion." And you can say that. Let's say why in the comments, what I've done wrong or something. What are your criticisms of this? And of course, I can learn. Maybe I can learn something from this. Maybe I got something wrong. Maybe you disagree with me. So put comments in the thing. If you have comments or questions, please put them in. I'll respond to them. Other thing is you can do is if you want to follow me on social media, my links are below. Please follow my social media links. Also, I also put my academic social media links, so you can follow my stuff as a scholar. That's below. Another thing you can do is if you want to help me to do with financially, you can want to become a member, Subscribe Star, do Subscribe Star, Patreon. You can, I think I put $5. I think is the minimum. I think I had to put I was gonna try $1, but I don't know if I can do that. I think it was $5 was the minimum a month, right? So I was like, oh, maybe I should put $1 in there. Maybe it won't hurt. I have to go check. Um, and the purpose of this is that you can help me do what I do. I mean, it would be useful. It's expensive now. Life is expensive these days. And oh yeah, because you have a job as a teacher, but I'm a Polish teacher. The salaries are lousy in that sense. We were all complaining. We were all complaining yesterday at our office meeting that we should hope we're getting a raise, but it's not going to happen because the government hates us, and I don't blame them in that sense. So therefore, that's why you can help. When I do these videos. I'm doing this. I guess I'm doing it as a public good. I'm doing it. I hope I'm too small to get advertise. I don't think I'll ever get advertisements in that sense. Maybe I don't even want them in advertisements. So therefore, Patreon or something like that would be useful in that sense. Um, I hope you will uh, uh, do it in that sense. Or you can another way you can help me is buy one of my books listed below. If you're not bought it for yourself already, maybe you know a friend or someone who might enjoy it, who might enjoy one of my books, or studying at school, studying. Now, of course, it's more Aristotle, not Rousseau, so I understand why people might not be interested. But please, there will be a way you can help. That's it. So take care. I will see you next time. We'll look at chapters 2 through 4. Have a good day. Bye bye.